Gavin Newsom assumed he was walking into a standard political showdown, completely blind to the fact that Rosa Delgado was about to dismantle his entire career. Exactly 41 minutes into the biggest political broadcast of the year, Gavin Newsom ceased speaking. It wasn't a brief hesitation, mid-thought, or a tactical pause. Before pivoting, he stared downward at his stand, glanced at the host, and uttered 5 words that would dominate American news feeds by sunrise. "I'd like to move on." Donald Trump simply tilted his head, smirked, and replied, "No." This is the narrative of how they reached that point. The New York Fox News studio was designed precisely for an evening like this. 2 stands separated by 40 feet, a live crowd of 400 and roughly 62 million people watching from couches, clinic waiting areas, salons, and those local diners where the TV remains locked on Fox forever because no one bothers to switch the channel. Gavin Newsom took the stage first. He appeared exactly as he always does on camera, the precise look of a guy who dedicated 45 minutes to ensuring he appeared totally effortless. His suit was navy, his signature hair was perfectly styled, and he flashed the trademark grin that propelled him from San Francisco's mayoral seat straight to the governor's office in Sacramento. If this evening went according to plan, that same grin would launch his 2028 presidential bid. He kicked things off exactly as his strategists intended. Looking at Trump, he extended a palm and recited the exact zinger his PR chief drafted mid-flight. "Standing opposite me is a guy who was held liable for deceit by a New York judge, yet he still believes he has the right to preach to us regarding integrity. But I am here. I showed up. So let's converse." The crowd responded exactly how he wanted. They clapped. It wasn't deafening, but it sufficed. Newsom soaked it in the way specific leaders consume cheering, like vital air, like validation of the greatness he already saw in the mirror. Over the following minute and a half, he executed what he does better than nearly anyone in national politics. He fired off statistics: California's GDP, standing as the 5th biggest economy globally, the boom in tech employment, and massive green energy funding. He slammed Trump's trade tariffs as a penalty on basic food and dismissed his border sweeps as pure media theater. His execution was spotless. The rhythm was deeply rehearsed. Each statement concluded with a descending inflection, mirroring a guy who had practiced extensively before a glass and loved his own performance. Trump remained anchored, both hands gripping his stand. He never cut in, never shook his head in disagreement, and never grabbed his drink. He simply stared at Newsom the way a person watches a stranger steal their reserved parking space, tolerant, faintly entertained, just waiting for the driver to finish so he could address the issue. Once Newsom finished, Trump allowed 3 full seconds to tick by. Inside a studio packed with 40 active mics, 3 seconds feels like an eternity. "Are you finished?" he asked. He ignored any potential reply. "Because I need to discuss a dining establishment. A very specific eatery, Gavin, which you are deeply familiar with." The 6th of November 2020. Trump dropped the date like a tax auditor listing a figure. Zero theatrics, merely the raw data. The French Laundry, Yountville, California. You grabbed a seat for a meal alongside 12 individuals. Influence peddlers and campaign advisors. The head of the state's medical association sat immediately beside you, and his designated influencer occupied your other flank. $350 per person. And that excludes the vintage alcohol, the premium steak add-on, or whatever private deals you and that influencer whispered about between dishes. He stopped and scanned the crowd. Not a single soul wore a face covering. The entryways were sealed because your gathering was excessively noisy. The hospitality crew literally had to slide the clear dividers shut because you were annoying the surrounding diners. That highlights exactly how rowdy your celebration got. You were enjoying the absolute peak of your existence. He let that mental picture linger. Then his pitch shifted. It didn't get louder. It dropped lower. Now I intend to share the story of a lady who was completely absent from that luxury meal. 4 rows deep into the live crowd, a spectator sporting cropped silver hair abruptly sat up straighter. She had zero idea what was about to happen. Not a single person had briefed her. Her given name is Rosa Delgado. She managed a dining spot known as Rosa's Kitchen, right in Sacramento, California. Not wealthy Yountville, but Sacramento, your own seat of government. Gavin, the exact town where you clock in. Rosa launched that eatery back in 1997. She prepared food 7 days a week for nearly a quarter century. She nurtured 2 children from behind that very register. Her female child, Sophia, was a sophomore at UC Davis right as the stay-at-home orders kicked in. Trump wasn't glancing at any paperwork. His eyes were locked on the broadcast lens. Rosa complied with every single mandate you handed down. She put up the clear barriers, she purchased exterior seating, and she slashed her crew from 12 down to 4. She submitted paperwork for every single authorization and adhered to every restriction you created. And you certainly generated an abundance of restrictions, Gavin. You produced such a massive volume of mandates that Rosa literally required legal counsel simply to figure out which specific limitations were active on any given afternoon. Then, suddenly, you completely banned all exterior food service, and Rosa forfeited her entire livelihood. 2.5 decades vanished into thin air. This didn't occur due to her own business shortcomings. It happened because you independently dictated that she was forbidden from accommodating 5 patrons at an open-air table. During the precise week you personally settled down to feast with 12, Newsom leaned toward his audio receiver. His delivery emerged polished and extensively rehearsed the trademark tone of an individual who had tackled this identical inquiry in the past and retained the defensive response in his reflexes. I have tackled the French Laundry situation in a very public and repetitive manner, he countered. I appeared on nationwide broadcasting networks, openly labeled it a grave error, and accepted complete accountability. That specific incident is permanently put to rest. Trump offered a slow, deliberate nod, the distinct gesture of someone who anticipated precisely that phrasing. You issued an expression of regret for the dining excursion. Gavin, I witnessed it myself. It was a highly appealing, incredibly slick expression of remorse. Yet, you entirely failed to offer any apologies to Rosa. You never dialed her phone number. You avoided traveling into Sacramento to visually inspect the vacant structure where her business formerly thrived. Your remorse was directed solely toward the broadcasting equipment, completely bypassing the actual victim. He hadn't yet concluded his remarks regarding the meal. However, this next aspect is what truly bothers me deeply, and I firmly believe it ought to agitate you as well. He shifted his focus toward the gathered attendees. During the period when Rosa's child was attempting to participate in university lectures at UC Davis via a fractured mobile display, solely because the executive leader mandated the campus closure and his own offspring were securely enrolled in elite, non-public academies. They attended physically, interacting with educators, socializing with peers, and utilizing an actual cafeteria. He forcefully closed every single state-funded educational facility throughout California, only to subsequently dispatch his own dependents to an alternative environment. Furthermore, when a journalist inquired regarding this discrepancy, do you recall his response? He claimed he was navigating life as a Zoom parent. A Zoom parent? His own children were physically positioned inside a traditional learning space, yet he possessed the audacity to label himself a Zoom parent. He wagged his head in disbelief. This specific movement lacked any theatricality. It was the genuine reaction of a person confronted with something so utterly ridiculous that his physical form reacted faster than his verbal abilities. Currently, 2 out of every 3 pupils in California are falling short of basic mathematical benchmarks. Over 50% are unable to achieve fundamental literacy targets. These statistics belong to him, generated directly by his personal assessment framework. An entire cohort of youth was severely disadvantaged, yet his personal offspring remained perfectly secure. They retained access to physical workspaces, instructors, and recreational areas. They were simply utilizing resources that the general public was explicitly barred from accessing. He allowed the weight of those facts to permeate the space, then directed his finger toward the seated crowd. Rosa is present in this very room tonight. Located in the 4th row, 400 faces instantly swiveled in her direction. Rosa Delgado refrained from raising a hand in greeting. She remained entirely seated. Instead, she firmly clasped her palms together against her thighs, maintaining a forward-facing stare. It was the precise gaze of an individual who has been dragging an immense emotional burden for an extended duration, suddenly informed they are permitted to drop it, yet still struggling to accept that reality. Your child was forced to abandon her studies at UC Davis, wasn't she, Rosa? Rosa provided a solitary, affirming nod. She departed from her academic pursuits to enter the workforce, simply because the culinary establishment funding her education had been obliterated. It vanished because Gavin Newsom mandated its closure, immediately after which he partook in a lavish banquet. If you belong to the millions of citizens who feel the rule-makers must follow their own rules, you already grasp the core of this narrative, and we are just warming up. If this is the harsh reality you've been hoping someone would finally vocalize, smash that subscribe button instantly, because the next part is even uglier. Trump reached beneath his stand, pulling out a solitary printed page. He raised it high, resembling a man displaying a lost receipt pulled from a winter coat months later, brandishing the ultimate proof that he was correct the entire time. $33 billion. He pronounced the figure deliberately before repeating it. $33 billion. That is the massive fortune stripped from California's employment division during the lockdown. Stolen, Gavin. Not simply misplaced in a ledger, but aggressively stolen by illicit actors, by global crime syndicates. Care to guess who pocketed it? A Chinese government-backed digital infiltration unit designated as Advanced Persistent Threat 41. Their street alias is Wicked Panda. I'm not kidding, that is their legitimate title, Wicked Panda. They drained billions out of your state's jobless network, and your executive team completely failed to block them. Newsom fired back swiftly. Every single territory across America suffered from EDD deception amidst the pandemic. This constituted a nationwide crisis propelled by federal directives under the former leadership. My specific administration launched aggressive countermeasures. We contracted a former national prosecutor, locked down accounts, and successfully reclaimed excess of $1 billion. It served as a solid retort, factually precise, the exact type of defense that thrives during a media briefing, prompting journalists to accept the premise and pivot. However, Trump didn't operate as a journalist, and he absolutely refused to pivot. Every territory faced deception. You are perfectly correct there, Gavin. Yet, merely a single state managed to forfeit $33 billion, just one, yours. Care to understand why? He elevated a fresh document. Your appointed Labor Secretary, Julie Su, received explicit warnings. The state financial inspector informed her the network was compromised several years prior to the outbreak. They told her point blank. LexisNexis, recognized globally as a premier authentication enterprise, volunteered to patch the flaw. Not demanding $1 billion, nor requesting $100 million, but entirely free of charge. They volunteered to execute the upgrade for zero cost, Gavin, and she declined. Are you aware of her justification? She claimed that stricter authentication protocols would unfairly penalize citizens of color. Consequently, under the guise of shielding marginalized groups, she permitted illicit actors to thoroughly pillage the funds. And subsequently, you rewarded her with a promotion. You dispatched Julie Sue straight to the Capitol and advised the Commander-in-Chief she was ideal to govern the entire Federal Department of Labor. He wrested that paper down and gripped another. Do you want to grasp the absolute depths of this failure? Your department dispersed financial relief to convicted individuals residing inside state prisons. People physically locked within holding cells across California were actively gathering out-of-work subsidies. The automated setup literally authorized a payout for a requester utilizing the alias Messy Trousers. That is devoid of any exaggeration. It represents a documented, sanctioned claim within your borders. Messy Trousers received monetary compensation, while a foreign-backed digital infiltration unit dubbed Wicked Panda extracted $26 billion of that total $33 billion. $26 billion flowed across the ocean, directly financing illicit substances, human smuggling rings, and coordinated adversarial actions targeting the United States. Your social safety net literally bankrolled the nation's adversaries. Down in the fourth tier of seating, Rosa Delgado's palms migrated from resting on her legs to clamping onto the sides of her chair. She squeezed them tightly now, driven not by rage, but by sheer memory. She had originally submitted her request for joblessness support back in March 2021, coinciding precisely with the week she was forced to shutter her restaurant. She completed every piece of paperwork flawlessly. She attached every requisite file, yet the digital infrastructure blocked her submission regardless. She dialed the department's contact number sharply at 8 o'clock each morning for a continuous 4-month stretch. Not on a single occasion did she manage to converse with a living person. The device would chime, link up to an automated vocal recording, and immediately terminate the connection. She made exactly 119 attempts. She maintained a precise tally within a small notebook because she harbored the belief that eventually an official would demand evidence of her persistence, and she intended to be fully prepared. Not a single soul ever inquired. Trump appeared to possess knowledge of these exact details, or perhaps an adjacent truth, because his subsequent statement was directed away from his opponent and focused entirely on the broadcasting lens, speaking directly to the 62 million people watching from their living rooms. Foreign digital thieves acquired their funds within 48 hours. Meanwhile, Rosa endured a 4-month delay and was never granted a solitary return call. 0. She placed over 100 calls, only to interact with a machine on every single occasion. Conversely, Messy Trousers bypassed all security measures without a hitch. He rested the paperwork down, positioning both palms evenly atop the surface of his stand. And here is the factor that exacerbates the situation exponentially. Once the dust settled, once the massive deception became public knowledge, every alternative region that had secured national emergency borrowing managed to reimburse those funds. Every last one. 21 territories accepted that fiscal aid, and 20 of them settled their debts to ensure their local enterprises wouldn't suffer from inflated tax burdens. You failed to do so. California presently remains indebted to the central government for billions. And who exactly is shouldering that burden? Not your office. It falls upon California's businesses. They are currently absorbing 3 times the standard national levy for unemployment coverage, $126 for every worker, rather than $42. Simply because you took out loans, allowed illicit actors to drain the accounts, and forced the financial penalty onto individuals who were already battling to survive. He shifted his gaze toward his rival. That perfectly encapsulates your California, Gavin. Wrongdoers secure massive payouts. The working class gets voicemail, and the final invoice is handed to whoever managed to stick around. Trump paused just adequately enough to allow the atmosphere to calm. Subsequently, he pivoted his focus, mirroring an orator who shifts from a singular grievance to a comprehensive critique of an entire system. Let us shift the dialogue toward the demographics still residing within California borders, primarily because that discussion is shrinking in duration annually. He required 0 documented prompts for this upcoming segment. A total of 1.7 million residents have evacuated your state since 2020. That isn't a mere estimation. That data comes directly from the Census Bureau, 1.7 million. Are you able to conceptualize the magnitude of 1.7 million people? That equals the entire population of Phoenix, Arizona. Your state effectively hemorrhaged Phoenix. He began enumerating items utilizing his fingers. Chevron, gone. Relocating headquarters to Texas. Tesla, gone. SpaceX, gone. Oracle, gone. Hewlett-Packard, gone. Charles Schwab, gone. In-N-Out Burger, Gavin. In-N-Out, a foundational pillar of California culture. 77 years in the state. And they moved their headquarters to Tennessee. You managed to alienate a burger chain that practically functioned as a religion in your state. He once again elevated his hand. U-Haul releases an annual report detailing which states experience a higher volume of trucks leaving versus arriving. California has occupied the absolute bottom ranking for 6 straight years. 6 years, Gavin. More moving trucks depart California than any other state in America. People aren't merely visiting Texas for vacation, they are packing up their furniture. He adjusted his stance, and any trace of humor evaporated from his tone. And honestly, why wouldn't they leave? Purchasing a house in California costs $874,000. That represents the median, not a mansion, just a regular home. Residents are burdened with twice the nationwide norm for electricity, sitting at 32 cents a kilowatt hour. Your specific gas tax will hit $2 a gallon next year, 2 full dollars strictly in taxes before you even pump the gas. Forbes positioned California at dead last for business for the 14th consecutive year. 14th, Gavin. That signifies that for every single year you've been governor, California stood as the worst state in America to run a business. Every year, without a single exception. He locked eyes with Newsom. When you became governor, California possessed a $97 billion budget surplus. $97 billion. Do you know what you have now? A deficit somewhere between $50 and $70 billion, depending on who's counting. And considering your track record on counting, I sincerely doubt anyone possesses the real number. He hesitated briefly, then lowered his volume. Rosa left too. Did you know that? She transitioned over to Reno. She currently occupies a 1-bedroom apartment and works at a hotel restaurant she doesn't own. She packed up her recipes and departed. Following 24 years in Sacramento, she simply exited. She didn't leave because of the weather, she left because she couldn't afford to stay in the state where she built her life. He refocused his attention on the camera. People don't leave home because they want to. They leave because you made it impossible to stay. If Rosa's story is hitting you the way it's hitting the people in this room, do me a favor. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with someone who remembers what California used to be, because Gavin Newsom desperately wants to prevent you from hearing my next statement. The subsequent remarks fundamentally altered the atmospheric temperature in the room. All previous discourse had centered around policy, systems, and numbers. However, his upcoming words targeted the specific people Gavin Newsom elected to keep close. Let us discuss your internal staff, Gavin. To be precise, let's talk about Dana Williamson. Newsom's chin elevated slightly, a microscopic adjustment typical of a man bracing for an inevitable impact while attempting to project ignorance. Dana Williamson, your chief of staff, the very person who managed your office every single day, officially indicted on 23 federal counts. 23. Bank deceit, wire deceit. She systematically drained $225,000 from a dormant campaign account. She claimed $1.7 million in fake business expenses on her taxes. $1.7 million? Gavin. She bought a $15,000 Chanel handbag, utilizing money that wasn't hers. She burned through $170,000 financing a birthday trip to Mexico, and this precise individual was positioned directly outside your door, wielding authority over how to spend California's money. He permitted the detail regarding the Chanel bag to hang in the air. Iwan Wu Chen Mei Yuan. Rosa Delgado used to work 3 months to make that sum. When she got caught, do you recall what you said? You expressed that you would miss her insight, tenacity, and big heart. Big heart. That is exactly how you characterized a woman purchasing Chanel bags with stolen capital. Meanwhile, Rosa, a citizen who worked 7 days a week for 24 years without ever improperly touching a dime. Rosa never received a public statement from her governor. Rosa got a locked EDD phone line. Stepping aggressively toward his microphone, Newsom finally projected a tone laced with unscripted edge. "I'm going to stop you right there," he declared. Dana Williamson's actions were her own. I have consistently stated publicly that I demand the highest standards from everyone in my administration, but I absolutely refuse to endure lectures on staff integrity from a man whose personal attorney went to federal prison, whose campaign chairman went to federal prison, and who is himself a convicted offender standing on this stage discussing other people's crimes. The dynamic within the room shifted. Newsom's loyalists suddenly recovered their voices, triggering a wave of applause from the audience's left side. The reaction wasn't massive, but it was loud. For a fleeting moment, perhaps lasting 5 seconds, the debate tilted. Newsom stood straighter, his jaw locked. He looked like a man who had finally located the fight he came for. Trump didn't flinch. He patiently waited for the applause to stop, and when he resumed speaking, his pitch had dropped to its quietest level all night. "My lawyer broke the law and went to prison. That's accountability. Your chief of staff broke the law, and you called her irreplaceable. That's the difference, Gavin. When my people do wrong, they go to jail. When your people do wrong, you miss their big heart." The prior applause from Newsom's side entirely failed to return. "But since you brought up integrity, let's talk about your wife." The room got quieter. "Jennifer Siebel Newsom, the Department of Justice, is currently investigating her for tax deceit. Your own words, Gavin. You announced it yourself. You called it a political hit job. Maybe it is. I don't know. But here is what I do know." He held up another page. Her nonprofit, the Representation Project, has taken more than $800,000 in donations from corporations that actively lobby your administration. PG, E, AT&T, Comcast, Kaiser Permanente. Companies that need things from the governor of California are actively writing checks to the governor's wife, and she's collected $2.3 million in salary from that nonprofit since 2011. He set the page down. But my favorite is Panera Gate. You remember Panera Gate, Gavin? You signed a bill raising the minimum wage for fast food workers to $20 an hour. Every fast food restaurant in California had to pay $20, except one, Panera Bread. Panera got an exemption. And the largest Panera franchisee in California just happens to be your personal friend and campaign donor, Greg Flynn. He turned to the audience. Rules for Rosa, exemptions for his friends. Rosa had to pay $20 an hour while she was going bankrupt. Panera didn't because Panera's owner plays golf with the governor. He wasn't finished. You've spent $37 billion on homelessness in California. $37 billion. The result? Homelessness went up 31%. Up, Gavin, not down. Up. California has 12% of America's population and 1/3 of America's homeless. 1 in 3 homeless people in this country is living on your streets. Your state auditor said you didn't even track where the money went. $37 billion. And you can't tell the taxpayers of California what you bought with it. You can't tell them because you legitimately don't know. He paused. When he spoke again, his voice carried a resonance, resembling sadness. When you were mayor of San Francisco, you promised you would end homelessness in the city. That was 2004. 22 years ago, you're still promising. The tents are still there. The needles are still there. The people are still there. And every year you spend more money, and the problem gets worse. At some point, the question isn't whether the policy is failing. The question is whether the failure is the policy. He stacked the pages together, straightening them against the podium, a small, methodical gesture, characteristic of a man concluding his presentation who desires a neat final record. So, let's add it up. $33 billion stolen from EDD, $37 billion spent on homelessness with nothing to show, a chief of staff indicted for fraud, a wife under investigation, a donor who got a special exemption, 1.7 million people who left, a budget that plunged from a $97 billion surplus to a $70 billion deficit. He looked at Newsom. And despite this, you want a promotion? This precise instant served as the explosive climax the hook promised 41 minutes in. The studio lights felt brighter now, or perhaps the dark contours on Newsom's face simply grew deeper. Gavin Newsom looked at his podium. Detailed outlines rested there. His team had dedicated 3 full weeks to meticulously crafting them. Policy responses, pivot lines, counterattacks, categorized by topic, color-coded, complete with recommended facial expressions, scribbled alongside the margins. None of them covered this. None of them could cover this, primarily because you cannot script a defensive retort against reality when that reality possesses a name, a face, and is positioned 4 rows deep, watching you struggle. He extended an arm toward his water glass, drank, and set it down. The click of glass meeting wood echoed as the sole sound across the studio. Then he looked at the moderator. "I'd like to move on." The words emerged steady yet noticeably thin, resembling the tone of a person trapped in rising water who just felt the liquid reach his chest. Every person inside the studio recognized the stark contrast between this current voice and the booming confidence that opened the debate 70 minutes prior. That initial voice represented a performance. This newly diminished voice represented cold calculation. The calculation amounted to, every sentence I say from this point forward will inevitably make it worse. Trump tilted his head, the identical posture from the opening, accompanied by the identical half-smile, though it now carried a heavier weight. The restrained expression of a man who derived less pleasure from this moment than people would later assume. "No!" One word. The room waited. "You don't get to move on, Gavin." Rosa didn't get to move on. She's sitting right there. She can't move on because her restaurant is a vacant building, displaying a for-lease sign in the window. The 1.7 million people who fled California can't move on because they were compelled to sell their homes at a loss and rebuild their lives in states that refuse to punish them for working. The families stripped of their unemployment benefits by Chinese hackers can't move on because nobody bothered to answer the phone. He took a deep breath. When he spoke again, the showman was gone. The counterpuncher evaporated. What remained was a far more basic, hardened tone, a voice stripped down to its floor. You broke California, Gavin, and you want America next. 9 devastating words. They struck with the finality of a door slamming shut as someone exits a room, solidifying an unspoken understanding that their departure is irreversible. Newsom maintained his position behind the podium. He offered zero response. His right hand drifted toward the water glass, hoisted it halfway, only to replace it gently against the wood without drinking. The faint clatter it generated upon impact resonated audibly throughout the room. The moderator shifted his gaze between the two men, checked the clock, and then sought visual confirmation from his producers behind the glass booth above the audience. "Well, take a break," he announced. Not a single body shifted during the break. Nobody checked their phones. The 400 attendees anchored within that studio simply sat in their seats, staring at the two podiums, attempting to process what they had just witnessed, an event that hadn't been a traditional debate for quite some time. This is the exact moment you share this story. Not tomorrow, right now. If you know anyone who watched Gavin Newsom lecture America about compassion while his own state crumbled, forward them this link. They deserve to comprehend the immense burden Rosa has been carrying for 3 years. The formal debate ended 11 minutes later. Additional questions were posed, alternative subjects breached, and further minor skirmishes occurred. None of it held any relevance. The video snippets that dominated every single network that night, continuing through the next morning and persisting throughout the week, were exclusively extracted from that same 4 one-minute window. Newsom's team published a statement at 1,147 p.m., before the candidate even left the building. It labeled Trump's presentation an unscripted reality television stunt, heavily padded with distortions designed to distract from his personal record of chaos and corruption. It totally ignored Rosa Delgado. It entirely skirted the EDD numbers. It offered zero clarification regarding the vanished $37 billion homeless dollars. It challenged absolutely none of the physical documents Trump had cited. 4 brief sentences, completely devoid of receipts. It was the exact type of statement that reveals everything by what it glaringly omits. By midnight, 3 major cable networks had run the French Laundry segment. By morning, all of them had broadcast the Rosa interaction. The specific footage capturing Newsom saying, "I'd like to move on," amassed 11 million views across social media before the sun rose on the East Coast. Someone edited it to dramatic music. Someone else spliced it directly adjacent to the French Laundry photos. The internet executed its typical ruthless function, seizing a solitary moment of profound weakness and ensuring it permanently follows you for the rest of your life. 3 days later, a Reuters poll revealed that Newsom's favorability among likely 2028 Democratic primary voters had plummeted by 9 points. Not a total collapse. 9 points, just enough to demote him from frontrunner down to second place, trailing behind a Midwestern governor who hadn't said a single interesting thing all year, but had successfully avoided being dismantled on national television. Just enough to prompt major donors to return phone calls a little slower. Just enough to make the political consultants who had already signed contracts with his exploratory committee start answering rival candidates' inquiries a little faster. A 9-point drop represents the auditory signal a presidential campaign generates, when a structural crack forms a fracture that hasn't broken through yet, but inevitably will when the pressure gets heavy enough. The Wall Street Journal released an extensive follow-up investigation detailing Dana Williamson's spending. The reporter had initiated her deep dive the morning after the debate. She uncovered 3 extra credit card transactions linked to the dormant campaign account that the initial indictment completely missed. She also discovered that Williamson officially categorized a rented Sacramento storage unit as a satellite office on her tax returns for 2 consecutive years. The storage unit strictly housed personal furniture. Fox News re-aired Rosa Delgado's segment 4 times in 2 days. She participated in one interview, positioned in a chair within a Reno studio, her hands folded in the exact rigid manner they had been inside row 4. The host asked her what she would say to Newsom if given the opportunity. Rosa pondered it for a long time, stalling for such a duration that the producer nearly cut to commercial. "I would ask him how the dinner was," she finally replied. "That's all. I just want to know if it was worth it." On a Tuesday evening out in Reno, Nevada, Rosa Delgado sat at her kitchen table, the television completely off. Her daughter called from Davis, having recently re-enrolled at UC using capital she stockpiled by working 2 jobs for 18 months. "Did you see the latest numbers, Mom?" 9 points. Rosa refrained from offering an immediate answer. She was currently fixated upon an object she extracted from her purse after returning from New York. A photograph not capturing the restaurant, but the sign. The hand-painted sign that proudly hung above the door of Rosa's kitchen for 24 years. Red letters set against a cream background, slightly faded on the left border, where the afternoon sun persistently hit it. She had personally taken the sign down on the final day, carried it to her car, and driven it to a storage unit she ultimately couldn't afford after moving to Reno. She left the sign behind. "Mom, are you there?" "I'm here. Are you okay?" Rosa placed the photograph on the table, gently smoothing the edges with her thumb, mirroring someone preserving an artifact they intend to keep for the rest of their life. Not because it fixes the damage, but strictly because it proves the history it captured was real. "He said my name," Rosa whispered. "On television. To his face. 62 million people heard my name. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. Certain things don't necessitate explanation, they simply require someone to finally say them out loud." Back in Sacramento, the storefront located at 4712 Franklin Boulevard, the exact spot where Rosa's kitchen served breakfast at 5 inches the morning and closed at 9 at night, stood dark. The for-lease sign had occupied the window for 2 years and 7 months. The landlord had long stopped returning calls from prospective tenants because they entirely vanished. Inside, looking through the dusty glass, you could still spot the counter where Rosa catered to 3 generations of families. You could identify the patch on the wall where her health inspection grade hung annually since 1997, along with the faint outline where the hand-painted sign formerly rested. That specific outline appeared significantly lighter compared to the surrounding brick. The sun had bleached everything except the narrow section the sign historically protected. Some marks are impossible to wash off. Certain tables are destined to stay empty, and particular names, once finally amplified out loud, simply refuse to get quiet.